Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's always wonderful to hear the chatter and the talking and the conversation, because a part of what we want to do is make sure that we're having dialogue and that people are networking and talking about these types of things. And so welcome to the last diversity dialogue for our academic year. We're so pleased to have so many of you with us today, especially given the wonderful New England weather. Time has certainly flown, but I think our weather is stuck on early winter. But hopefully it'll be spring soon and then summer and we'll all be warm and cozy. We're here in the Harvard Hillel, and I wanted to just say a few words about them. They're the catalyst for Jewish life at Harvard University. They transform participants into creators, inspiring and enabling students to become active authors and ambassadors of Jewish spirit, thought, values, and culture, sharing manifold Jewish life with the entire Harvard community in the world. We've been here for our dialogues for the past couple of years, and it's a wonderful space, and we're really grateful that they allow us to be here and to partner with them. Now, you know, as I look around the room, at the last dialogue, I always get humbled and inspired. I'm humbled because I realize we wouldn't be able to do this work and create such quality programming without all of you and all of your support. And I'm inspired by the level of learning and sharing that occurs at each one of the dialogues. Without your willingness to attend, we wouldn't be able to do this. So as you know, the theme for this year has been storytelling as a tool for inclusion. And it's a powerful tool, storytelling is, that's been used even by our own university-wide task force on inclusion and belonging to help bring us together as one community, to help us create community. If you haven't already had a chance to review the report from the task force, it was sent out to everyone in March from President Faust, so I'm sure you'll be able to get a copy. Now, the series has been thought-provoking, challenging, it's been inspiring. We've heard stories of others and learned things about ourselves and about some of our colleagues. From the candor and openness of Professor Stephanie Burt, who shared with us about her transition from male to female while she's a tenured faculty at Harvard, to the down-to-earth discussion from Anthony Peterson about what he learned from his grandchildren who happened to be a different race than he. This all helped us to become stronger, more knowledgeable, and we believe helped to create a more inclusive environment. We've come to realize that we really cannot be inclusive if we can't truly be authentic. And we've all heard the old adage, to thine own self be true. But that's not always so easy. Harvard Business School has written articles about authenticity, and they've also written articles about the negative impact of not being able to be authentic. The Theater, Dance, and Media concentration in the FAS has a course on authenticity and acting. Harvard College is going to host a workshop on executive presence, balancing authenticity and authority. So our topic today, authenticity at work, is very relevant. To that end, we have an expert here with us. Mike Robbins has traveled the world, delivering keynotes and seminars that empower people, teams, and organizations to work together effectively and be more successful. He's inspired thousands to reach new levels of awareness and productivity, both personally and professionally. Through his speeches and seminars and writing, Mike teaches important techniques that allow people to be more appreciative, more authentic with others, and importantly with themselves. He's been featured on ABC News, the Oprah Radio Network, Forbes, Fast Company, The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and many, many other publications. His fourth book, Bring Your Whole Self to Work, is due for release on May 1st. But again, there's privilege with attendance. He's made it possible for us to have copies before it's released to the public. And so our Rally Challenge participants have received a copy of the book this morning already. Others there'll be time for you to purchase a copy. The Coop is here with several of his books that you can receive, and there'll be a book signing at the end of the dialogue. And so I'm looking forward to learning from Mike today. We're really pleased that he accepted our invitation. We are live streaming. Shout out to those who are watching us online. And so we ask if there are questions or comments that you're going to make, please do that into a mic so the folks who are watching can hear you. So without further ado, let's welcome him forward with a round of applause.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, how many of you have ever been in a meeting where you were nervous but you were pretending not to be? Most of us, right? So I'm here to talk a bit about authenticity at work, and I thought I'd start by sharing one of the many times that I've been in a meeting where I was nervous but pretending not to be. It was actually a pretty important meeting. It was about a decade ago. It was with my publisher. So I had written my first book. It came out in 2007, and I'd had a conversation on the phone with my editor named Alan, and he was asking me if I had an idea for a second book. And it was only 6 months after the first book it came out, and I said, well, I've been thinking about it maybe a little while, but I said, I think I want to write a book about authenticity. And then we had a brief conversation about it. Nothing big. He called me back the next day and he said, hey, Mike, I've been talking to the team, and there's really some interest on a book on authenticity. We'd like to hear more. Why don't you come in next week and we'll talk about it? Okay, so I'm like excited and thinking, this is cool. They're interested, but I'm thinking I'm going to go to the meeting and it's, we're going to have like a brainstorming session with Alan and the team that had worked on my first book. So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. My publisher for that first book is called Jesse Bass. They're in San Francisco. They're an imprint of Wiley, which is a larger publisher that's right outside of New York. And so anyway, I get to the meeting and Alan's there and the team, and we sit down in the conference room and Alan says, we're going to wait for a few minutes before we start. And I said, okay, why? And he said, well, Deborah's coming to the meeting. I said, really? And Deborah's the president of Jesse Bass, who I'd never met. And then he said, yeah, and Deborah's boss from Wiley in New York, he flew in for the meeting. Alan says to me, he really wanted to hear your pitch. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a pitch meeting. Now I'm like mad that Alan didn't tell me, and I wouldn't. But of course, like many of you, I'm good at pretending like I'm not nervous when I really am. I was like, oh great, it'll be great to meet them. And now inside I'm like freaking out and thinking, oh man, I had some thoughts and ideas, but did not realize exactly what this meeting was. So anyway, wait a few minutes, Deborah shows up with her boss, like, hey Mike, nice to meet you, so tell us about the book. So I go into my little pitch, right? And you know how sometimes when you start a meeting like that, you might be nervous at first, and then you kind of get into the conversation, and it kind of goes away? Yeah, that wasn't happening, right? I mean, because I was sort of put on the spot, and, it wasn't like I was making a fool of myself. I know some things about authenticity. I was talking, and they seemed engaged. But after a few minutes, instead of getting less anxious and nervous, I was getting more anxious and nervous, and I was like having sort of an internal wrestling match with myself. You ever have that happen? Where, and it was just driving me nuts. And finally, I just stopped because I couldn't stand it anymore. And I looked at Deborah and I said, hey, Deborah, listen. I know I mentioned this when you came into the room a few minutes ago and we met. It's really an honor to meet you. And I said to her boss, and I said, and you flew all the way out from New York? I said, but I noticed that I'm feeling really nervous. And I'm trying hard to impress you. I said, can I stop doing that now and just be myself? And literally, as it was coming out of my mouth, the voice in my head was screaming at me, don't say that out loud! What is wrong with you, right? And I hung in the air for a moment. And then there was a very awkward pause. And I looked around the table and I could see the looks on everyone's faces. They were like, did he really just say that out loud? Right? That's what they're... But then something interesting happened after the awkward pause was that Deborah laughed. So did her boss, so did everyone else around the table. So did I. It was more than laugh. I exhaled. And I said, listen, I'm not sure I was completely prepared for what this meeting actually is. I said, but here's what I know about authenticity. I know it's important. I know it's important to me. I know it's important to everybody I know. I know it's important in the relationships that I have. I know it's important with all the companies and organizations I work with and managers. And I just know it's important. I said, but I also know it can be challenging. It can be tricky for a lot of reasons. So I want to write a book about that. Why is it challenging? Is there anything we can do to make it a little bit easier? And then we just started to have a conversation, a dialogue. In that room, I stopped pitching my book idea and we just started talking. What makes it challenging for them in their lives, in the publishing industry, in their company? And I was talking about my own life and my own family and what I see with my client. We just started talking. And at the end of the meeting, we get done. Alan says, oh, thanks, Mike. We'll give you a call, and I leave. And I get in my car. I'm driving back home, and I'm doing that thing. You ever do that after, oh man, I should have said this. And as I'm going through what I should have said and not said, I'm wondering, is Alan going to call me that day? Is it going to be a week? Is it going to be a month? When am I don't know. I got a phone call from him at the end of the day. And here's what he said. He said, Mike, I wanted to get back to you by the end of the day. He said, first of all, after you left, we talked about you. He said, we all agreed that was one of the strangest pitch meetings we'd ever been in. He said, but we really appreciated the openness of it, the genuineness of it. We really enjoyed the conversation. And he said, and I wanted to let you know that we're interested in publishing the book. So I was really excited, right? It was like a big deal. I was excited, and I learned something really important that day. And then I've learned a lot over the last decade since then because I've been studying authenticity. But the thing I learned that day was like, as important as it is to be prepared in life, and most of us try to do the best we can to be prepared, show up, know what we're doing, know what we're right. Sometimes it's as important, if not more important, to actually be present, right? To just really connect. Who's in front of me? What's going on inside of me, inside of another person in a situation, and be able to acknowledge or respond to that, even when it really matters, even at work, even when the stakes are high, even when we're trying to, you know, pitch an idea or get someone on our side, whatever it is. The thing I've learned since then is research for that book. That came out a number of years ago. I've done a lot of research over the last number of years, worked with lots of different organizations and teams and university places, and just authenticity is important, and probably more important than ever in today's world, and particularly given what we're here to talk about with respect to diversity and inclusion, and it's hard for a number of reasons. So we're going to take a look at that today. How can we be more authentic in our work in particular, but in our lives, and specifically when we engage in conversations and try to be as aware as we can to connect with each other, especially given how diverse and different we all are. And I got two primary intentions for our time here together. My first intention is that we have some fun. So you interested in having some fun? Okay, even those of you on the live stream or watching the video after, hope you have some fun too, okay? The second intention is that the stuff that we talk about here, and we'll have some discussions, there'll obviously be time for questions and things, but we're gonna do an exercise or two, because I really want you to be able to walk away from this with an experience of authenticity, not just a concept, and how it impacts your life, how it impacts how you work, how it impacts how you interact with each other. So that's the second intention, is that we actually have an experience of it today. Cool? Okay, so let's start with this. So we're gonna talk about authenticity, right? So I'd love to find out, what does authenticity mean to you? Particularly, what does it mean to be authentic at work? So if you would, find someone to pair up with here in the room. And again, if you're watching the live stream and you're by yourself, you'll have to have a conversation with yourself. But you can do that, right? So just talk to someone a little bit. What does it mean to be authentic? And particularly, what does authenticity mean at work? All right, take another minute or so with your partner. Okay, start to wrap up with your partner. And go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop. Okay. All right. Yeah, it's good. I do too. I'm familiar with the talking a lot thing. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this. So what does it mean to be authentic, particularly at work? What does authenticity mean to you? Truth. Absolutely. Thank you. What else does it mean to be authentic? Genuine. Yep. What else? Transparency.
Being humble.
Humble. Yeah, being humble. Not trying to fit in.
Trusting your own judgment and being brave enough to share that when it's important.
Yeah, so trusting your own judgment and then being brave enough to share it when it's important to you. Right? Yeah. Vulnerability. That's a big one, right? Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I mean, as I've studied this over the years and as I've traveled around a lot here in the U.S., but, you know, spent some time in other countries as well, it's interesting that a lot of those words are what people say. Transparency and genuineness and truth and, right, vulnerability. I mean, these words, and we kind of all know what authenticity is, and we might use different words to describe it or to define it for ourselves, but we know what it is. But what's interesting is being authentic at work is kind of a unique piece of it, right? And most of the work that I do, most of my clients are organizations. I do a lot of work in the corporate world, different companies in Silicon Valley. I live out in California in different industries, you know, but also with universities and nonprofits and government agencies. And so, you know, where we work is obviously unique and different. So working here at Harvard is different than working other places. But being authentic at work has kind of its own unique aspect to it. And I think sometimes we misunderstand what authenticity is in general and particularly at work. I remember speaking at an event a number of years ago, and I gave a speech at this conference on authenticity. And I got off stage, and I'm literally walking off stage, and this guy makes a beeline right over to me, gets right in my face, and he says, I'm authentic all the time. And I'm like, okay. And he was like upset, right? I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, I've lost some jobs because of that. I said, really, right? I didn't know this guy, but I was getting a pretty strong sense of his personality, right? Just like in like 10 seconds, wow. And I'm not sure what prompted me to ask him this somewhat provocative question, but I looked him right in the eye and I said, now tell me the truth. Is it authentic or obnoxious? And he was a little shocked. I was actually shocked, like, wow, I said that? But given, I don't know, I mean, he took him a moment after he was shocked, but then he kind of laughed and he said, well, maybe a little bit of both. And I said, all right, listen, I said, I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the self-awareness. I said, look, man, I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, I bet it was the obnoxious that got you fired, not the authentic. Because being ourselves, being true to ourselves, yes, sometimes what we believe and what's important to us, if we speak up, people might not agree with it, they may not like it. It can be controversial. It can cause problems. We can be talking about certain things, certain sacred cows in the organization. It could be with respect to gender, diversity, orientation. It could be, right, lots of things, our beliefs, faith beliefs otherwise. But if we're being authentic, it's much less likely that we're going to upset and offend people. And the problem is when we talk about this or think about this, we often think of authenticity at sort of a superficial level. And if we go a little deeper, there's much more to it. The way I always think about and the way I've learned over the years of studying this is authenticity actually exists on a continuum. On this side of the continuum is where we'll put phony or inauthentic. Now, we all know what that looks like. It's easy to spot in others. What's it like to interact with another human being who's being inauthentic with you? What's that like? It's upsetting, awkward, right? It's like, it's sometimes, I'm sorry? Alienating. Yeah, it's like, oh, what's going on? It's just, right? And, you know, sometimes it's just annoying. Sometimes it can be downright feel like disrespectful. This person is you know, trying to, what's going on? And we get, understandably, very upset personally. And then, of course, we love to point fingers, and there's many opportunities to look for it in our culture. Point fingers at leaders, at people that we see. That person's fake, that person's phony, that person's inauthentic, that person's not telling us the truth. And as a culture, understandably, we're very skeptical. But as easy as it is to point fingers at other people, a better place for us to take a look at it if we really want to understand this for ourselves is start to look within ourselves. Where do I find myself being inauthentic? that's a harder place to look. It's not usually malicious, right? It's not like you and I wake up in the morning and say to ourselves, ha ha ha, you know what I'm going to do today? Lie to everybody, right? I'm going to manipulate people. I'm going to deceive. No, it's not like that. But there's lots of situations in life, particularly at work, if we really reflect, it's like, was I really bringing my whole self to that conversation, to that situation? Did I really say what I thought? Did I really express what was there, right? I mean, and again, and for a lot of reasons, we don't. And it's not, again, it's not usually malicious. I'll give you a few examples of why we find ourselves being inauthentic. And it's important to pay attention because if we have more self-awareness for our own inauthentic tendencies, we can actually move in a more authentic direction. But if we're not aware of it, not much we can do, right? A few examples that I see are areas. One is just social norm, cultural norm. Every place. So living here in the Boston area, there are certain social norms and cultural norms. Working here at Harvard, there are certain social norms, cultural norms. Things that if you've been here for a long time, you don't even notice anymore because you're part of it. I come in from California and I notice, oh, it's a little different here because I've come from the outside. It's one of the values of being from the outside of any group going into a group is you can notice different things that you can't see when you're inside the group just because, right? But I'll give you an example of something we do, and this isn't unique to Harvard or the Boston area or even the East Coast. It's something we do kind of as Americans and other places, but there's a funny question. What's the question that we ask each other when we greet each other? Hey, how are you? And it varies regionally, the words, how you doing, how's it going, what's, something like that. And what's the response? Fine, and how are you? Or out in California, right, other people might say awesome or something, right? But it's some word, some positive word, I'm doing good, and then how are you, right? It's completely inauthentic interaction, by the way. Here's how you know. Have you ever asked that question, hey, how are you? And someone actually answers and you're like, oh gosh, sorry I asked. Because you realize it's not, in that moment, it's not that you don't care about the person, it's not that you're not actually interested, but you're not really asking that question. You're simply saying hello, and that's how we say hello. It's a friendly way to say hello. And they're supposed to say, I'm fine, and how are you? And you're supposed to say, I'm fine, and then you move on. That's the social norm, the cultural norm. If someone breaks the norm, it gets awkward. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute, let me pay attention to what I was just actually asking. That wasn't what I was asking. And the response of I'm fine is also an inauthentic response. I don't even know what that means. I'm fine. I'm fine. Well, I don't know, right? But we don't really answer because like you don't really want to know, or I don't really have time, or I got somewhere else I got to go, or whatever. But that's just one example. How many other things happen in the environment that we just do because that's what everybody does, right? And to your point about fitting in, one of the challenges is we all want to be part of the group, the community. And sometimes in order for us to do that, or it seems like in order for us to do that, it takes a certain amount of what seems like inauthentic behavior on my part in order to be part of the group. Another area that it'll show up, particularly at work, and at a place like Harvard, I imagine this happens a lot, is when you don't know something or don't understand something, right? You ever have that situation where you're in a meeting and people are talking about something and you have no idea what they're talking about, but you pretend like you do? You're like, oh, sure, and you have no idea. You're like, oh my gosh, you look around and you think, everybody else seems to know what this is. I'm not admitting it. I don't know what this is, right? It happens to all of us all the time because there's just so much information. There's so much going on. Even if you've worked here for a long time, there's things happening and changing and people coming at all kinds of stuff. But we've all learned how to pretend like we know stuff when we don't, which most of the time we can get by and people don't notice, but it creates stress for us. And sometimes it actually can come up and bite us, right? Because then people assume you know. And we have a meeting and everyone's like, okay, great. And then you go on and you come back and it's like, I didn't figure that out. And then someone was expecting me to do something that I actually didn't know how to do or didn't understand, right? Another situation where it shows up is when we have to have a potentially uncomfortable or difficult conversation, right? And this could be about a lot of things. How many of you in here manage people? Anybody manage people? Yeah, those of you who are managers, part of your job is to give people feedback, is to coach them, right? And sometimes that involves feedback that's not always that fun to give, right? I've been coaching managers for, close to 17 years, all the years I've been doing this work, and I've never met one manager that's ever said to me, Mike, you know what my favorite part of the job is? Giving people critical feedback. I love that part. Because it's hard to do. Even if you feel like you do it pretty well, it's hard to do. And even if you don't manage people, all of us are in situations with peers, right? With faculty, with students, with just people in life where sometimes there's a situation, it's like, oh gosh, there's something I want to say, but I don't know how to say it. And we start talking about issues of race and gender and orientation and religion and, oh, I'm uncomfortable about this, but, oh, okay, well, how do I say that? People in this room, in this meeting, in this situation look different than me, come from a different background, they're a different age than I, whatever. I just have a very different worldview. And maybe in this moment, I feel like I'm the only one, so I don't feel safe saying, whatever it is. So again, because of the fear or the discomfort of those situations, we don't say it. And what ends up happening, again, and this is not to judge us necessarily or overly harshly, is that we tend to blame the circumstance or the situation or the environment, right? People say to me all the time, I can't really be authentic with my boss. Or I can't really be authentic with, this person, that situation, or with this, or, my mother-in-law, or whoever it is, right? It's someone, then they tell me some story, and I did, and then it was terrible, and now I've been, okay. And my response is often, listen, I know it can be hard. It's not easy. But it's not that you can't, it's that you won't. And that may be the best thing to do. That may be the safest thing to do. That may be the thing that is just, I'm not saying that you should in every situation, but just own it as a choice. I'm choosing not to be. And maybe for some of us in a variety of different situations, and it's harder for a lot of reasons, and we can honor and acknowledge that, but at the end of the day, it is a choice that we make. I choose not to, because I've decided that's the better option. And if we can just own that without judging ourselves or the environment or the people around us and go, okay, what would be something different? What could I do or say that would be more authentic, moving me in a more authentic direction? That's why it's important to acknowledge our own inauthentic tendencies, right? And sometimes, look, especially when we're talking about issues of race and gender and just talking about diversity and inclusion, sometimes it's that we're clueless. We just aren't aware. Michelle, my wife, and I were at an event about a year ago, and there was a woman speaking, and she was talking about gender differences. And the room was filled with, about 50-50 men and women. And she asked us, she said, I want to ask the men a question first. She said, for all the men in the room, when was the last time you felt physically unsafe? Like, just think of the last time you remember feeling physically unsafe. She said, was it 10, raise your hand, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago. And the men in the room were raising our hand at different times. And then she said, I'd like to ask the women the same question. And she said, was it 10 years ago? Was it 5 years ago? Was it a year ago? Was it 6 months ago? Was it 3 months ago? Was it a month ago? Was it a week ago? Was it in the last 24 hours? Probably 80% of the women's hands in the room went up, including my wife sitting right next to me. And I was like, what? And I looked around the room, and most of the men in the room, like me, had this look of, what? Where? Why? How? It was like, complete, and she said, that's one of many things. The world is very different if you walk through the world as a woman than as a man. And she's like, and we don't talk about that. And we show up at work, and we're in different places and situations, and it's not in an extreme environment that you would think, oh, this is something where everyone feels unsafe. It's just, and to me in that moment, I was like, wow, how many things am I just not aware of? Not because I'm rude, not because I'm insensitive, not because I'm a jerk, just because I don't even think about that. It doesn't show up in my world, right? That's one example of many, and so what happens sometimes is, again, it doesn't justify it or excuse it, but it does mean that sometimes we're not paying attention because we're not paying attention. And so those uncomfortable or those difficult conversations, they take a lot of courage, but if they happen and we do it in a way that actually brings us together and makes them, oh, now I can start to pay more attention. Well, what's that like? Well, So there's a lot of reasons why we might find ourselves being inauthentic. And they may make sense, but if we want to move in a more authentic direction, it takes courage. So as we move along the continuum, does this make sense? So inauthentic. And if you notice it's good news, you go, okay, I can make a different choice. Before we get to authentic, we get halfway down. This is where honest is. Now, honest is good, yes? How many of you were taught? My mother used to say this to me all the time. Honesty is the best policy. Honesty is the best. She would say that all the time, and she was right. Although how many of you learned in the course of your life, particularly your professional life, at work, sometimes when you're honest, it can cause a problem. Yeah, we've all had that happen, and we've all learned the hard way. We're honest, and it's like, oh, no, don't be like that. Not that honest, not with that person, not in that situation. That's bad. You'll be in, okay. And we all learn. We all learn how to massage the truth. So we say to ourselves, okay, I'm not going to be phony, inauthentic. I'm going to be honest, but mostly honest. Right? Politically correct honest. Makes me look good honest. Has people not get offended or annoyed with me. Right? And here's the problem. Then we operate on this side of the continuum, which is where most of the world operates, especially at work, is kind of over here. But it's stressful. I have to constantly remember, how honest can I be with you? And how honest can I be with you? And how honest can I be? Oh. It's hard. Where there's real freedom and power is on the other side of honesty. Yes, authenticity, it is about honesty, so that's the first part. And it does take courage to be honest, particularly when we're talking about different issues, things that are more sensitive. However, to get to authenticity over here on the side of the continuum, we have to remove something from our honesty, and we have to add something to it. The thing we have to remove from our honesty is our self-righteousness. Self-righteousness. Now, what do I mean by that? How many of you, like me, have a lot of opinions? And how many of you, like me, think your opinions are right? Yes. Of course you do, right? That's what we call self-righteous. Now look, there is nothing wrong with your opinion. You're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. And on certain issues, we have really strong, passionate opinions, as we should, and we're entitled to. And when we start talking about race, and we start talking about gender, and we start talking about orientation, and we start talking about inclusion, and we start talking about our culture and what's going on right now, these opinions, understandably, within me and probably most of you, are very strong and passionate. And based on life experience, and in some cases based on a lot of pain and things that have happened to us that other people maybe don't understand. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we have strong, passionate opinions. And even if we're not talking about issues of race and gender and inclusion, if we're just talking about things that matter to us, about work, about academics, about life, about you name it, the issue isn't with our opinions. The issue isn't with the passion with which we hold them. The issue isn't even whether, now look, some of us speak our opinions out loud more than others. The issue is the self-righteousness with which we hold the opinion. Because when I have an opinion, passionate opinion that I hold with self-righteousness, and you don't agree with me, what does that make you? Wrong. Now we have a problem. I'm right. You're wrong. Now, I do realize that in general, culturally speaking, on the East Coast of the United States, different from where I live on the West Coast, you all in general tend to be a little more direct than we do. Safe to say, have you ever spent any time in California or on the West Coast? Yeah. Okay. It's kind of, you know. However, what I understand from talking to a few of you around here at Harvard, people are very polite. Is that true? Yes. Which is nice. Polite's nice. Just like in California, we like to be polite and nice and everything's awesome, right? But here's what ends up happening. Here's what that tends to look like then. We have a meeting, we go, okay, great, wonderful, awesome, okay, oh, well, you know, we talk, we discuss, whatever, and then leave, and then I go, he's wrong. And not only is he wrong, he's an idiot, right? Or some judgment about him and the whole thing, but I don't say anything to him because that would be impolite. Or maybe he's in a position, maybe he's a faculty member, maybe he's some person of authority, maybe it's a student, I don't know what it is. The environment is such that it's not okay for me to say that to that person, so I have to be nice and polite, and then I'm really mad, and then I tell you, and you go, I know. I had to deal with him too, and we go, good, let's go to lunch and talk about him, right? But, right, and this happens, it's natural human behavior, but it becomes very dangerous because what happens, particularly if we do this with people we work with or have to interact with, he has no idea. He's over here just doing his thing, and I'm over here judging him and telling her, but not telling him. Because I'm too scared to talk to him, because he might get mad at me, or he's in some position of authority, or he might go tell someone and it'd be bad for me, but I can tell you and it's safer, and we can go commiserate about it and then find other people and we start doing it. This is how separation happens inside of organizations all the time. And this is not to justify that like, oh, everything people do is cool. No. But we're unwilling to have the conversation, but we still want to hold the self-righteous opinion. And here's the thing. Look, if we get in each other's face, you're wrong, and we have it out, that might scare everybody, but at least there's a little bit, it's a little healthier, it's out on the table. But the thing about self-righteousness, and I'm not saying water down your opinions, I'm not saying don't believe what you believe, but self-righteousness, the natural human response to self-righteousness is defensiveness. Even, by the way, when we're right. Have you ever known you were right about something? You just, I know I'm right. And you're trying to convince someone and they're just not hearing you, they're not right. It's frustrating, isn't it? And the more mad you get and the more you try to prove how right you are, the worse it gets. And you like have all the facts on your side and you're trying to explain. It doesn't matter because it's an emotional thing. They're defending themselves, not against the facts, not against what you're saying. They're defending themselves against the self-righteousness. And the thing about it, as humans, particularly in our culture, and right now, we do not like to be wrong. Have you ever had this happen? I have had this happen before. I've been in an argument before with my wife, and in the middle of the argument realized, oh my gosh, she's actually right and I'm wrong. Most of the time I'm able to admit it, but sometimes if I'm stubborn enough or we're in it enough, sometimes I will keep arguing anyway. As crazy as that is, right? Because I'm like in it and I'm like, I'm not giving up. And it's like, wait a minute, I love her. This is really important. What am I doing? What's my goal here? To be right. And the tricky part in a university environment, particularly a university like this, where like being right is really, really important, and being wrong is really, really bad, you all have to deal with it in an even more intense way. But to be mindful, look, and here's the difference. So again, I'm not saying water down your opinion. I'm not saying don't believe what you believe passionately, but know the difference between self-righteousness and conviction. Self-righteousness is I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. We see examples of that so many places in our world right now, and it's dangerous. Conviction is I believe this to be true. I'm willing to speak up about it. I believe this passionately. I might be scared, but I'm willing to engage. However, I have enough humility and enough self-awareness to realize, first of all, I might be wrong. And even if it's not an issue of right and wrong, at the very least, I can understand someone else might see this differently than I see this. I was on the plane 2 days ago flying from Florida to New York. This was on Tuesday. And I'm just working, and I got my headphones on, and I'm on a little JetBlue flight, so there's, TV's on. And I was watching CNN, and I'm kind of in the background because I'm doing something else. And the guy sitting next to me was watching Fox News. And at one point, he starts pointing at my screen, and he's like, fake news, right? And I didn't know if he was just like saying it or he's saying it to me, and I was like, oh God, that's weird, right? And he said it again, and I took and I'm like, what? And he was fake, and I said, and I was like, okay, this would be interesting. And I said, I noticed you're watching Fox. He goes, yeah, it's the only honest news on TV. And I was like, okay. And in my brain, it's like, just like, you got work to do, man. Don't engage. You know what I mean? I'm like having this whole, and I just was like, wow, really? Why do you think that? And then he starts, right? And what was so interesting, we ended up having an hour-long, passionate, at few moments, very awkward conversation about the media, about politics, about the president, about this whole thing. But like as much as there were moments where I found myself getting really defensive and self-righteous, but for the most part, what I tried to do, because I'm trying to do this as a practice, was I tried to stay curious. Like tell me more. What's that? Like, I want to know more. Just because when we're in that place of curiosity, even when we think someone, right? I was feeling a certain amount of self-righteousness coming at me from him and was responding in kind at moments when he called me names and whatever, right? But I was like, but I realized, look, I felt safe. Like, this man's probably not going to like beat me up on the airplane, but I'm going to learn a ton over the next bit of time if I can engage in this conversation about myself, about how to be better, because I've not been very effective at these kind of conversations recently. And it was interesting. I have no idea. I don't think I influenced him in any particular way. He didn't walk off going, oh, you're right. I'm sorry, I was wrong. No, but the point wasn't, right? It wasn't about being right and trying to win for me in that moment. It was more about being curious, and could I stay convicted and true to myself, to what I believe, and be willing to speak up, even though it sounded like and sensed like he didn't agree with me on a lot of stuff, and at the same time be curious enough to try to learn something in the conversation, not try to win. I don't know how effective it was ultimately, but I did definitely learn something. So again, it's not about backing down per se or watering down, but it's removing the self-righteousness. I thought about this morning in the context of what we're hearing in these dialogues. One of my favorite Dr. King quotes is this. Dr. King said, "We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them." We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them. Now look, that is not an easy thing to practice. You think about what Dr. King was saying in the context in which he was saying it, to whom he was saying it. With the understanding of, look, I understand you're angry. I understand. I am too. We all are. This is not right. This is not just. However, if we're going to have influence and really try to change things, we're not going to persuade people morally with contempt, even if our contempt is justified. And I think about that right now. And how that impacts each of us differently in this room based on your background and how you look and where you're from and all of the different factors that go into the places where you would like to see things change. In relationships right here at work, in the larger context of where you work, in the society at large, where are the places where you want to have influence? Can you be passionate? Can you speak up? But can you remove the self-righteousness and the contempt? Even if in your mind, just sometimes like in my mind, it seems justified. It ultimately doesn't serve what it is we're trying to accomplish. And it's not easy to do, because here's the thing about self-righteousness. This is what makes it so tricky. When you and I are being self-righteous, we don't think we're being self-righteous. We think we're right. So it's really tricky. So we need people around us. This is one of the things, the best teams I work with have the ability to point out each other, and respectfully, point out each other's self-righteousness. I need people around me to point my blind spots out because I can't see them myself. Right? So can I be honest, but can I remove the self-righteousness? Not easy to do. It's a lifelong, ongoing practice. And when we're talking about issues that really matter to us, personal stuff, stuff that we may be talking to other people about they can't understand, you're a woman and I'm a man, and we're going to have a conversation about this, and there's just inherent ways I'm not going to understand that. You know, I'm a straight white man from California with my worldview being what it is, and you maybe being different or looking different or coming from a different place or being of a different race, nationality, background. Right? Can we engage in conversation, even talk about that in a way that we can actually be honest with each other but not self-righteous, not defensive? Not easy to do, but important. So honesty without self-righteousness. And then the thing we have to add to our honesty is what you said, vulnerability. It's what I call the authenticity equation. Honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability. That's authenticity. But vulnerability is tricky. It's tricky. Dr. Brene Brown from the University of Houston defines vulnerability as emotional exposure, risk, and uncertainty. Emotional exposure, risk, and uncertainty. Can you think of anything meaningful or important that you've ever accomplished or experienced in your life that did not involve emotional exposure, risk, or uncertainty? I can't think of anything that matters, that really means something. But the thing about vulnerability is we don't like to be vulnerable. It's uncomfortable to be vulnerable. I was speaking at an event, I had a really interesting experience with this a few years back. I was speaking at an event in Japan for one of my clients, US-based company, but they have people all over the world. And they invited me to speak at this conference in Japan for a bunch of their leaders. And they said, you know, Mike, well, a number of the people do speak some English. It's better if we actually translate the event. So we're going to do a simultaneous translation, which means that I would speak and there'd be a translator in the back and everybody in the room would have a little thing in there, right? So I've spoken at some events like this. Challenging for a couple reasons for me personally. First of all, I speak quickly. And I'm always aware of that when I'm speaking to people, particularly if English is their second language, right? And second of all, as much as I try to be aware and inclusive and culturally sensitive, whenever I leave California and go anywhere, but particularly when I go outside the country, I'm immediately aware of, oh my gosh, my worldview is so American. I make so many references to so many things that are like, okay. So it's like a challenge for me just to think about how to be inclusive. So anyway, I was meeting with the translator before the event. 3-day-long event. I'm doing the opening keynote for this 300 people in the room. I don't use slides when I present, and she was like a little stressed because she's like, I don't have an outline. I don't have slides. What are you going to talk about? And I'm like, I don't know, really. I mean, I do, but like, I'm sort of extemporaneous. And so anyway, she's like, so tell me just a few of the key things. And I said, well, one of the things I'm going to talk about is authenticity. And I said, here's how I define authenticity. Honesty without self-righteousness and with vulnerability. And she says, vulnerability? And I said, yeah, vulnerability. She says, vulnerability? I said, yeah, vulnerability. She said, there's no word for that in Japanese. I said, what? She goes, well, there is a word, but it's a bad word. And now I was fascinated, right? I was like, ooh, what is it? She goes, it means weakness. I said, really? Huh. I said, you know, what's interesting is most people think that's what it means in English, too. Then she looks at me and she says, why would you tell anyone to be vulnerable? And now she's like mad at me, right? I was already nervous about giving the presentation. Now I'm having like a standoff with the translator. And I said to her, I said, my research and my experience has taught me two really important things about vulnerability. First of all, it's the key driver in human trust and connection. I was like, so I'm going to talk to all these leaders, and like, they want to have trust, but they got to be willing to be vulnerable. I said, secondly, it's really the birthplace of innovation, of change, of creativity, of anything new and different. She wasn't buying it. So we're having this kind of awkward moment. I said, look, do me a favor. I said, translate what I say as best you can. I said, if it doesn't translate, it doesn't resonate, maybe it's culturally insensitive, if it doesn't work, I'll figure it out. Now the truth was, I didn't know how I was going to figure it out. I just wanted to stop talking to her because she was scaring me, right? So I leave, and I'm thinking, you know, I don't have any slides. Maybe I just leave out the whole vulnerability thing. But like, I'm up on stage, and I'm talking about it, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't talk about authenticity without talking about vulnerability. It's so key to all my research, and I can't. So I start talking about it. And as I'm talking about it, I start looking at her in the little translating booth, and I'm thinking to myself, what is she saying, right? I mean, I don't speak Japanese. She could be saying, don't listen to this crazy American, right? Like, I have no idea. I mean, so, and I'm like, I wonder, anyway, but so it kind of seemed like it was resonating, and then I decided, you know what, in addition to just talking about it, I'm going to actually do an exercise with them. So I had them pair up and did an exercise. We're going to do this exercise in just a moment, and as they're doing the exercise, I could just sort of intuitively start to feel in the room, like, okay, I think it's, right? So we get done with the exercise, I wrap up my presentation, I get off stage, I walk to the back of the room. The little AV table was over there, and I'm taking off my microphone. And there was no break. Next presenter comes up. He was speaking Japanese, so he did not need her translation services. She gets out of the translation booth. She walks across the back of the ballroom over to me. She says, thank you for your presentation. I said, you're welcome. She said, I don't think I understood what you meant about vulnerability when we were talking earlier. She said, but after listening to you talk and the exercise, and I think I understand now. She said, vulnerability is not bad. It's just hard. I said, yeah, it's hard. It takes courage. It's not easy. It's uncomfortable. We avoid it for understandable reasons, to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves safe. But it's essential for us to be authentic at work, for us to be able to engage in real conversations. A mentor of mine years ago said to me, Mike, you know what stands between you and the kind of relationships you really want to have with people? I said, what's that? He says, probably a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation you're too afraid to have. He said, you get really good at those 10-minute sweaty palm conversations, you'll have fantastic relationships. He said, but if you avoid them because they're awkward and uncomfortable, then you'll just sort of, be a victim. So let's do this. Before we do this exercise, I want to talk with your partner briefly about one thing. What makes it difficult or challenging to be authentic in the way I'm talking about here? Here working at Harvard, in the role that you have, whether we're talking specifically about issues of race and gender and orientation and inclusion and diversity, or just in general, what makes it difficult or challenging to be honest, to remove the self-righteousness and to add the vulnerability? Chat briefly with your partner about that. And if you've come in since we paired up, find a partner, pair up with someone to have this conversation. If you're watching us on the live stream or the video, think about this in your mind or write it down. All right, take another minute or so with your partner. Okay, start to wrap up with your partner. Okay. Go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this. So what makes it difficult or challenging to be authentic? In the role that you have here at Harvard, in general, what gets in the way? Power dynamics. So say more about that.
Managers person who reports to you.
Right.
Kind of situations, whether that's as a TF to students, TF to faculty, or manager to direct report.
Okay, so the power dynamics that exist, manager to whoever we report to, our manager, faculty, students, like they're just different dynamics. Again, in a university environment where you all work here, it's complex, right? It's different than most other working environments, and that plays a role because I might be a certain way with a peer versus with my manager versus with a faculty member versus with a student. I have to understand and be mindful of the role and the dynamic of who I'm dealing with, right? What else makes it difficult or challenging?
Just say when you present your vulnerability and someone says to you, oh, whatever do you mean?
I'm sorry?
Whatever do you mean?
What do you mean?
Would that be true?
Yes.
What are you talking about?
Yes.
You're not met.
Yes. So we express something vulnerably, and the other person is like, what are you talking about? Or you're not met. It feels, right? We make ourselves vulnerable, and then the response, right? It feels, it's scary enough to do it, and then someone responds in a certain way. It's like, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have admitted that, right? Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Harvard has so many long-standing traditions.
Yes.
At least from my meeting, but someone relatively new in their program. If there is such a cultural adaptation period, they frequently have suggestions.
Yeah.
In the early days that people want to do.
So there's a long tradition here. There's a way things are done, and so therefore it sounds like what you're talking about culturally. If you're new, it sounds like there's some unwritten rules about when you're allowed to bring up ideas and when people will listen to you and like, okay, you've only been here 6 months. Wait till you've been here for 6 years or a decade or two, then we'll listen or whatever, right? And that's true in some. Look, when an organization, one of the things as a university, right, you have such a strong brand. And the thing about a strong brand of any kind, I know it's kind of, you think about it in the college setting, in the corporate, it's like, and there's a lot of tradition. There's people who, generations of families who've sent their children, a whole nine, all of it, it becomes challenging because, again, part of what makes us great is the tradition, the brand, the expectation, all of that. And then part of what makes it challenging is like, oh, but then we're less likely to change. We're less open to new ideas. Right? It exists. I see this in the corporate world all the time. In businesses, even businesses in the tech world that have grown really fast, when they get to be really big, all of a sudden it's like, hold on, don't blow it. But the point of how they got to be really successful was they didn't have that mindset, right? And in a university environment, which is going to be, in general, regardless of the university, again, a little more traditional, maybe a little more hierarchical, but then a place like this, I could only imagine, right? There's some challenges that exist there, right?
There's a cultural value to being confident, winning, being successful, being
Yes.
right. It's an American.
Yeah.
It's an American value.
Yeah.
And when you show your vulnerability, it feels like you're being the loser.
Yes.
Or something like that. You're.
Yeah.
And when you think about promotability and who could be a boss and who could be a supervisor.
Yes. Yeah, so there's this idea, right, in America in general, there's this idea of winning and being confident and being strong. So showing our vulnerabilities is often the opposite of that. And the fear that we have is if I do that, it'll come back for me on a performance review, or it'll be, right, I'll somehow get excluded. One of the biggest fears that we have, there was a study done, Google did a study over a 3-year period called Project Aristotle that maybe some of you read about, right? And what they did, they started it, and Google's a client of mine. They're a fascinating organization in the sense that they've grown incredibly fast over the number of years and been very successful as a business. And one of the things, they commit a lot of research, a lot of data, a lot of number crunching inside the organization, but they're also very much committed to figuring out how to optimize what they do. And so they looked at, okay, we have some teams inside our organization that thrive and really produce at a really high level, and others that don't. Let's start studying what's working. What are those teams doing around the world that are more successful? And then they said, wait a minute, instead of just studying ourselves, maybe we should look at what else is happening in the world. So they so they spent 3 years and really looked at all this data and metadata of teams inside of all different types of organizations and industries across the world. What are the key components of high performance? And after all their studying and all their number crunching, they came out with 5 primary things, and the number one factor that created the environment for high performance was what they call psychological safety, right? And what psychological safety is, psychological safety basically means like I can speak up, I can take a risk, I can admit my vulnerabilities, right? And I won't be excluded from the group. And so what often makes it hard for us to be authentic, particularly vulnerable, is I'm going to do something or say something that's going to damage my reputation, damage my credibility, have me not be advanced if that's what I want, have me not be included. And in an environment like this, I would imagine, again, I'm an outsider coming in, but I can imagine, again, as a staff member, right? And I imagine there's some people on the staff who are alums, who went to Harvard, but I imagine there are a number of you who did not. So then there's that. I'm not part of the club. If I'm a student here, right, I got accepted, I got admitted. Now, the students have to deal with their own set of challenges, right? I was an undergrad at Stanford, so different, obviously, but similar in the sense of like, and one of the things for the students, whether it's undergrads or grad students in particular, but this exists for us as human beings, there's a ton of the imposter syndrome going on, right? I remember for myself as an undergrad at Stanford, the first day I got to Stanford was simultaneously one of the most exciting and humbling days of my life. Because up to that point, I was the kid that was going to Stanford. And not only was I going to Stanford, I was going to Stanford to play baseball. And Stanford has a really good baseball program. So it was like, great school, great baseball program. I was sort of, right? And I show up on campus at Stanford, get there and have a very basic but very profound realization. Oh my God, everybody else got into Stanford too, right? And then I was like, whoa, and it wasn't just, and then very quickly, both in class and on the baseball field, not only was I not so confident, I'd never been around so many smart and talented people in my life, and I started to feel dumb. I started to feel like I wasn't any good. And it was like, you know, I dealt with feeling insecure and scared, but it was a different level of it, and then nobody was talking about it. So then, of course, I thought I was crazy. And then I felt like I can't admit it because then they're just going to kick me out. Someone's going to come knock on my dorm and go, hey, Robbins, you're out of here, right? You don't belong here, because that's the imposter syndrome, the fear that they're going to find out, right? And so that probably exists on campus, again, not just for the students, for the faculty, for people on staff, and in situations, even if it may not seem that way, it's part of being human. But again, we don't talk about it. So it gets in the way, right? When we start talking about really sensitive issues around race and gender and ethnicity and orientation and religion and things that are really, really personal and important to us, it becomes uncomfortable in a lot of situations for us to talk about, for us to be real about, because we're afraid of what might happen or how might we be perceived or what that feels like. And particularly depending on the environment you find yourself in or your own background, you have understandable reasons. There was something that I found when I was researching for Bring Your Whole Self to Work, and I want to just read this little piece because I think it relates to what we're talking about here. And this concept, and probably some of you have heard of it, called covering, right? The term covering was coined by sociologist Irving Goffman to describe how even individuals with known stigmatized identities make a great effort to keep their stigma from looming large. Kenji Yoshino, a constitutional law professor at NYU, further developed this idea and came up with 4 different categories in which we cover. Appearance, affiliation, advocacy, and association are the 4 areas. In essence, we often do what we can to cover aspects of ourselves that we believe might put us out of the mainstream of an environment. Yoshino partnered with Christy Smith, managing principal of Deloitte University Leadership Center for Inclusion, to measure the prevalence of covering at work. So this was the first study they did on this concept of covering actually at work. They distributed a survey to employees and organizations across 10 different industries globally. The over 3,000 respondents included a mix of ages, genders, races, ethnicities, and orientations, and they all came from a different level of seniority within their organization. 61% of respondents reported covering in at least one of these 4 categories at work. According to the study, 83% of LGBTQ individuals, 79% of blacks, 67% of women of color, 66% of women, and 63% of Hispanics cover. While the researchers found that covering occurred more frequently within groups that have been historically underrepresented, they also found that 45% of straight white men reported covering as well. So this idea that we cover for a variety of different reasons, whether it's based on gender, orientation, race, background, or just being human, it's a human phenomenon. Now, clearly it exists for some of us more than others for understandable reasons. But one of the things, as we talk about vulnerability, and in this diversity dialogue, as Andrea called me in the fall to ask me about coming to speak here, I shared with her, one of the interesting things, what I studied in school was American Studies with a specialization in race and ethnicity. And what's interesting, for most of my professional life, out in the world speaking and writing, I have stayed away from and shied away from talking about race and gender, because my thought was like, who wants to hear about diversity and inclusion from a straight white guy? Like, I don't know what I have to say, or it would offend people, or what would I know, or just the interesting thing, though, about my background is I grew up in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area, where I still live. I don't live in Oakland. I live a little north of San Francisco now, but I was raised by a single mom, went to public schools in Oakland, and all growing up, particularly by the time I got to high school, I played sports. I played baseball in college, but I also played basketball. And at Skyline High School in Oakland, where I went to high school, I was not only the only white kid on the basketball team, I was the only white kid in the whole league. And, I was aware of it at the time, clearly. Like, when they said white boy, we knew exactly who they were talking to, right? And so, the issues of race in the community where I grew up and in my life were very prevalent, but it actually wasn't until I went to college. I went to Stanford, and all of a sudden, it was very different. And I would call, and my friends would call me, and they'd say, what's it like at Stanford? And one of the things I would say when I went to Stanford was like, I've never been around this many white people in my life. And it was weird for me, even as a white person. I was like, whoa, I just was seeing the world. And what I started to realize, over time, like, oh, wow, there is a significant amount of privilege being white and being male, which I didn't totally understand. And then as I've gotten older, one of the things that I've been able to appreciate, knowing that I don't know what it's like to be female, I don't know what it's like to be a person of color, I don't know what it's like to be gay or bisexual or transgender, I don't know what that's like from a personal experience. And I do understand it, at least culturally, where I sit and what I look like and where I'm from and all of that. But I did, especially as a child and as a teen and as a young adult, had a lot of experience of what it felt like to be other, which I appreciated to some degree then, but appreciate even more now because, again, on a human emotional level, there is that experience. Now, culturally and historically, for a lot of us, it may be very different. But to understand, what does that feel like? And can we tap into the vulnerability of what that feels like when we feel like I'm different, I'm separate, the people around me may not understand because they come from a very different background than I come from. And one of the places where we can start to try to find more common ground, and I don't mean this in a corny, cheesy way, in a real way, is it possible for us to be mindful of how much we cover and not cover so much? Right? The theme of this year for these dialogues is, right, storytelling as a way to engage inclusion. Can we tell our stories to each other, our real, personal, authentic, vulnerable stories, and then listen to the stories of other people and try to understand one another in a real way? And one of the ways that we do that is through authenticity. So in service of that, here's the exercise we're going to do. Okay? Now, for this exercise, everybody needs a single partner. So most of you have someone you paired up, you've been chatting with, you got a partner. Some of you, I know you came in later, it's just the way it's configured, you're in a group of 3. No big deal. But if you happen to be sitting in a group of 3 or by yourself and don't have a partner, find a partner. So raise your hand. You might need to move just for the exercise. So everyone find a partner. If you're watching us on the live stream and you're by yourself or you're watching the video, take out a piece of paper and see if you can do this exercise written down and just reflect on it, okay? So everyone find a partner. Once you find a partner, pick an A and a B. If you're without a partner, I don't want you to feel excluded. Please raise your hand. We'll find you a partner, okay? Find a partner. If you need a partner, raise your hand. Anyone who needs a partner? Over here. Who else needs a partner? You need a partner? Would you mind? Everybody have a partner? You got an A and a B? Okay. Okay, so here's how, I'm going to explain the exercise. I'll explain it, then I'll model it, I'll go first, and then we're all going to do it. Okay, so what's going to happen in a moment, one of you is going to go first, and you'll have about a minute, minute and a half. I'll switch you so everyone has the same amount of time. But when it's your turn, with your partner, you're just going to repeat this phrase. If you really knew me, you'd know this about me. Now, you don't have to say anything you don't want to say. This is not like shock your partner time, okay? However, the metaphor that I use when we're talking about authenticity and particularly vulnerability, the metaphor that I use is the metaphor of the iceberg. It's a bit of an overused metaphor, but it works really well in this context. What we're doing here is lowering the waterline on our iceberg. And it's totally your choice. You get to choose whatever you want to share. You don't have to say anything you don't want to. However, my invitation, my challenge to you is to allow yourself to be vulnerable. If this person really knew you in this moment, what would they know about you? And maybe you know them, you work with them, so they do know you. But maybe they don't. You're paired up with someone that you don't interact with very often. Whatever the case is, just, again, I'll go first to kind of give you a sense of what it might look like, okay? Now, one of the things I also am going to ask for the exercise to really work and to be safe is that we all agree to keep whatever our partner shares with us to ourselves. Is that cool? That means like when you go to lunch, you can't go, guess what he said to me during the exercise? Okay? Okay, and then once you're done, and while you're talking, by the way, your partner's not going to be interacting with you or asking you questions or making comments. You're just going to listen. Then we're going to switch. Second person will go. And then once we're done, once both of you have had a chance to share, then I'll give you another minute or two where you can talk back and forth. Got it? Okay, I'll go first. And again, it's really more of an in the moment. Do you have a question?
Is this as related to work or just?
Oh, great question. It's related, whatever you want it to be. But it's really like today. It's not like, when I was 3, this thing. It's more just like today, if you really knew me, here's what's going on down below the waterline for me. So I'll go first to give you a sense of what it might look like if we were partners. So if you really knew me in this moment, what would you know? Let's see. If you really knew me, you would know, I've been really excited about coming here. I was really grateful that you asked me to, and I've been feeling nervous about it, intimidated a bit by coming to Harvard, and to talk about, race and gender, and the things we're talking about here, which are really important to me, but it's scary and vulnerable, particularly given what I look like and where I come from and my own background. If you really, really knew me, you would know I'm also really excited. My book comes out in like a week and a half, and you all are literally the first human beings, besides maybe my family and my editor, that has the book. So it's super exciting, and then it's like, oh gosh. Like it's scary. Even though I've done this before and I put books out in the world, it's that feeling of how's it going to go and what are people going to say and how, So I'm sort of standing on the precipice of that as it's just about to come out. And if you really, really, really knew me, you would know, both my parents have been gone for a number of years. And we lost my sister a couple years ago. And this morning I got up early, happy to be here, and I walked around campus even though it was raining, and I was just, I have these moments where I really miss them. And I think of something like me being here today and knowing I was here, they would be so excited and so proud. And it would be one of those fun things to call and say, hey, guess where I am? Guess what I'm doing? And so I was both feeling that sadness, but also just remembering them and feeling also that love and that connection. So it was kind of a bittersweet walk that I had on campus this morning. So those are some things, if you really knew me, you would know. Now it's your turn. And did you pick an A and a B with your partner? Person B, you're going to go first. Okay. Now, remember, just listen for me, because I'll say start to wrap up, and then I'll say stop, and then I'll say switch. So see if you can listen. And person A, as the listener, the first person goes just for like a minute and just keep going. You keep lowering the waterline like I did, then we'll switch. The listener, your job is to just listen. Okay, that means even if you have some really good advice for them, just listen. And also that means to see if you can actually pay attention to what they're saying and not just plan what you're going to say.
Before you start,
Yes.
when we talk, it's hard to hear you. You clap or do something that makes a different
Yes.
sound than just talking.
Okay, go for it. Person B, go for it. Thank you. Okay, person B, start to wrap up. Start to wrap up, person B. And person B, go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop, person B. Okay, so now we're going to switch. So person A, it's your turn. If your partner really knew you in this moment, go for it. Okay, person A, start to wrap up. Start to wrap up, person A. And person A, go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop. Okay. So as a way of acknowledging yourself and your partner and everybody, let's give ourselves a little round of applause for doing that. Okay. So now, did everybody switch? Everybody switch? Okay, so now that you both had a chance to go, or I saw there was a couple groups of three, hopefully everyone got it in. If you need a little more, I'm going to give you another minute or two to talk back and forth now. Anything you want to say in response to what they said? And or talk a little bit about what was it like to have that conversation? All right? And if a few of you didn't get something to say in, feel free to share, but just another minute or two with your partner, and then we'll discuss it all together, okay? Okay, start to wrap up with your partner. And go ahead and stop. Go ahead and stop. Okay. All right. So Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. How was that? What was that like? You like that? Some of you loved that, some of you did not love that. How many of you noticed maybe it was a little uncomfortable? How many of you, by the way, how many of you went first? Person B, who went first? Yeah, you thought you were going second, right? Anyway. But by the way, did you notice, by the way, if you went first, which can often be a little more challenging, like, gosh, what do I say? How do we do it, right? If you notice, person A, if you went second, you probably responded in kind, meaning they lowered their water line to whatever degree they did, and it made it safe or not so, right? That's how safe it is. It's not usually I go, and then you go, right? Because we're relational creatures, right? I relate you, if you're willing to be vulnerable with me, and it's hardest often to go first. But if we go first, even though it's a risk and it's scary and what are they going to do with it and they might judge me and then they don't, then they respond in a similar way and it's like, whoa, that's interesting, right? How many of you noticed you could relate to what your partner was talking about? Yeah. Now that's the interesting thing because now sometimes we can relate because we look the same and we have the same background and we're from the same place or we work in the same place so I can, but sometimes not. Like, you might look really different than me and have a very different background and work in a very different place and have a whole different worldview and everything, but then you start to lower the waterline and all of a sudden, I can relate. We can't always relate to the specific circumstance, right? Like, I did this exercise recently with a woman who was pregnant, and she was talking about pregnancy and all this, and it's like, I mean, we have children at home, but obviously I've never been pregnant, I don't know, right? But I'm like, as she's talking about it, I can't relate to being pregnant. I can't relate to being a woman. But I could relate. Why? Because I could relate to what she was talking about emotionally. Right? When we get down below the waterline, the further down below the waterline we go, the more similar we become. And that's one of the paradoxes of this. We can try as best we can to respect and appreciate and understand all of our differences and see that and honor that to whatever degree we can, and at the same time realize, when we did this exercise, when I did it with that group in Japan, I don't know what they were talking about because they were all speaking Japanese, right? But guess what? I do know what they were talking about. They were talking about what you were just talking about. Life. Being human. The reason why we can relate, by the way, is the natural human response to vulnerability is empathy. When people share their story, their real story, all of a sudden, it gives us permission to share our story, and we can relate. Look, what's the Me Too movement about? Many really important things, significantly for women, but for our culture, it's permission to say, this happened to me, and me too, me too, me too, me too. And when you think about it, Me Too has been about something very specific, understandably, but at a human level, when we open up and share our real experience, whether it's about pain or suffering or abuse or anything, or just about being human, all of a sudden it's like, wow, you have that experience or you felt that? Again, I may not be able to relate to the specific circumstance, like maybe I didn't go through that, but I know what it's like to feel that. And we start to get to a more empathetic place. We start to hear and see and understand each other. That's why stories are so powerful, when we're willing to tell the real story, the authentic story of our experience. Even and especially when we might feel uncomfortable about something and it's hard to say, and I want to bring this up, I don't know how to bring this up, I'm not sure. People come to me often and say, Mike, how do I address this difficult situation? How do we talk about this issue without it turning into a big thing? How do I give this feedback without this person flipping out and getting really defensive? How can we talk about issues of race and gender and inclusion in a way that really has people feel included and we don't just do it to check a box? And my response, first and foremost, is always, I don't know exactly how to do it or to say it. But what I do know is if you start from a place of authenticity, it's more likely to go well. If you tell the truth about what your real experience is. You sit down to have a conversation, you have to give someone some feedback, and you're uncomfortable about giving the feedback, maybe you say something like that. Not like an excuse, but like, I'm feeling nervous right now. I'm worried I might upset or offend you. Or whatever, and then you go into it, right? But to say that as a human, human to human. By the way, those feedback conversations, they're vulnerable for both people, not just the person getting the feedback. And the same thing when we talk about issues that are important to us and we try to be as inclusive and aware as possible. Inevitably, particularly some of us, are going to be more unaware than others for a variety of reasons. Other people are going to get more upset and offended than others for a variety of reasons. But if we're willing to remember, right, at that level, it's like, whoa, we're way more alike than we are different. And we can still appreciate and acknowledge the differences at the same time. Does that make sense? So before we start to wrap this up, I want to see if there's questions about what we exercise, about anything we've been talking about around authenticity at work, around diversity, inclusion. Yes?
Earlier you said that you count on your colleagues and friends to call you on your self-righteousness.
Yes.
Self-righteous is a pretty big word.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the language those people use to call you on your self-righteous
Oh, the
behavior.
language
Because
that people
to say, hey, you're being pretty self-righteous.
Hey, you're being,
right now,
yeah.
doesn't sound like it would work very well.
Yeah, that's often a self-righteous judgment. Hey, you're being self-righteous, I say self-righteously, right? So the question is, right, how do people call? I think, look, this is part of where if you have good, strong relationships with the people on your team, or at least people in your life, to give them permission to, here's how to point things out to me. So like with my wife, or with people on my own team who I work with, or with a few coaches and mentors and people that I have that I've given permission and said, please, if you see me being self-righteous or selfish or arrogant or just unaware, let me know, right? So it's not necessarily they go, hey, you're being, again, in some cases, we were talking a little bit about this, when you have a really strong relationship with someone, you really trust each other, you give each other permission, there are people in your life you will let say really offensive things to you, but you've given them permission to do that. Like knock it off or shut up or stop doing that, right? In general, if we did that, that's not cool, because like if I did that to you, that would be rude and offensive. But there are certain people in my life who can talk to me like that and I can talk to them like that because we've made that agreement. And then there's people in another level out that maybe not quite like that, but I've requested. And that's part of it. I think when we make that request, like I want to be better at this or that or this, and I trust you enough that if you see me off target, you can tell me. Right? And then the way they do that, the language that they use, again, I always think of it like relationships of all kinds are kind of like dancing. We have to learn how to dance with people. And we have the way that we dance, but then how do I dance with you? And you know what I mean? So it's kind of a negotiation. And I don't think we spend nearly enough time having those conversations and negotiating. Here's how to give each other feedback. Here's how we can support each other. But that's a sweaty palm conversation that's a really valuable one for almost everybody involved. Does that make sense? Other questions? Yes?
You were talking about the conversation you had with the man on the airplane.
Yes.
And you said you felt safe.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you about that, I don't know, getting that feeling of safety or,
yes.
you know.
Well, it's interesting. So the conversation, the argument, discussion I had with the man on the plane, I mean, I felt safe in the sense, again, and this could part of be as a man with another man. I mean, in some ways, it's like, he got pretty intense. And there were a few moments I felt physically safe. Like I didn't think, and I felt mostly, I was a little nervous and worried that like people around us were getting uncomfortable. Right? Because it's very rare when I meet another human being who's louder than me, which I was like, But it was loud and it was like, wow, and it was kind of an awkward, right? Not the most appropriate place to have that conversation, but here we go. But I would say that emotionally there were times I felt a little less safe just because I was feeling judged and a little bit attacked. But in some way in my mind, I kept reminding myself, like, you're going to get off this plane, you're probably never going to see him again. Use this as an opportunity to practice a lot of what you've been preaching about and also trying to get better at, because I've been really ineffective in my conversations with the people around me who disagree with me politically about stuff recently. And as someone who spent the last 17 years of my life as a communicator, it's been humbling, right? And I notice, again, it's a lot of my feelings of like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say, I just get mad and and it's like that doesn't usually go anywhere. So I was proud of the fact that I at least hung in there, and I did learn some stuff and understood some of where he was coming from. And you know what I would say about this too? At one point in the conversation, I looked at him, and he had said something or called me some name or whatever, and I just said, okay, hold on, time out. I said, this is what I'm most concerned about right now. This, what you and I are doing right here. We got to figure out in our culture like how we can have these conversations without all of a sudden, I'm here and you're there. And then I said to him, do you have children? And he said, yeah. And I said, I have children too. Right? And I was like, and just like as a parent, like I'm trying to do the best I can and I mess up all the time. And I was like, and some of these things about politics and society and what's going on, I have really strong beliefs and opinions, and like, I don't really know. I'm just doing the best I can, right? And it was that moment, again, of vulnerability that to me felt like I felt more relaxed, and it felt like our conversation went a little bit deeper and got a little more real. We didn't end up agreeing with each other, didn't end up with some hug and it's all wonderful and right? It would just, but it was, there was a moment of openness there. So, and again, it's trickier when there are relationships, people we work with, we have to see over and over and over again. Because if you and I have an awkward interaction or a difficult conflict that doesn't get resolved, and then I have to come back and work with you every day, that's harder than, okay, weird interaction on a plane, never see you again. Do you know what I mean? So it's different. It's different. Any other questions? Yes? So authentic at work and then having boundaries?
Yes.
So say more about that. What do you mean?
I just think it's, oh, sorry. I think it's difficult to, like, I try to be authentic at work, but also yeah, stories get shared and feelings and,
yes.
But then keeping things professional and.
Right. It's tricky, right? So how do we be authentic at work and then also have boundaries? One of the things I often say, especially when I'm talking to managers and leaders, but this is true for all of us, there are times in life at work you have information about something, about someone or about a situation or about something that might happen or a change or whatever that you literally can't, you and I work together, we're really close, you can't tell me. Let's say you're my manager. Or there's some information about someone else on the team. Right? If you were being completely transparent and open with me, you'd just tell me everything, which of course would be problematic for a lot of reasons. But so can I hold a boundary where I'm absolutely going to, right? You're my manager, you're authentic with me, real with me, and then, ooh, she's like, we're close and we trust each other, and then I ask you, say, hey, what's going on with this? Because I want to be in the know, and I'm not in the know, but I know you're in the know. And then you have an option. You're like, okay, well, I could tell him because that he'd be excited, right? But if I do, I'm now violating the trust of other people and of my role. Right? Or on a more personal level, right? You said stories get shared, or you share something in confidence, but I don't keep it in confidence, and I tell someone else, and all this, right? So this stuff is tricky, because what ends up happening, right? Sometimes we've all done this in life. I share something with you that I shouldn't have shared inappropriately about someone else because, hey, we're cool, and you're not going to tell anyone, it's all good. What I've just done, even though you like it, now you've said Mike's not safe to share things with. Because he just told me something about her he wasn't supposed to tell, and I know that even though I like, in some weird way, I like that I know, I don't like that I know now. Do you know what I mean? It's hard part about being human. We have to navigate that, and sometimes I have to say, like, you ask me and you really want to know, I have to say, Tina, look, I'm really sorry, I can't talk to you about that. It's awkward for a moment, right? But then it's like, now you trust me more, actually. And know that when right? So we got to figure out a way to have boundaries, and at the same time, we can go to the opposite extreme, and then it's all about boundaries, it's all about role, it's all about hierarchy, it's all about, and then we're like stuffy and like not relatable, and nobody can connect with us. Look, there's two types of credibility. Professional credibility, personal credibility. Professional credibility has to do with your role and your title and your background, and right? And look, in a university, it's like where you went to school and all these kinds of things, and it matters, it does matter. And you notice, for better or worse, you get judged. We all get judged based on a lot of different things. And in a place like this, pedigree and background, all that stuff. But look, you wouldn't have the job that you have. I wouldn't be standing here in front of you. Professional credibility matters to us in our careers. But that's not what really matters in terms of our relationships. It's personal credibility. Can I trust you? Can I relate to you? Are there healthy boundaries? Can you make a mistake and then acknowledge it and say, you know what, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Even something social. I had a meeting yesterday in New York City, and at the end of the meeting, it was just like I had this awkward moment. You ever do that? Like you're rapping. I just was awkward, and I wanted to say something, and I didn't say something, and I left, and it was like, oh. So I sent an email. Hey, sorry, I was a little weird at the end. Here's why. I just, because I'm human and I'm weird sometimes. Like, But like, I don't know, maybe he got that email and go, God, he really is weird. Do you know what I mean? But like, but to me, in my own personal integrity, it felt better to say something than not say something, because then I was going to sit on it and feel weird about it. Does that make sense? So we all have to navigate that for ourselves. All right, maybe one more question, if there is one, and then I got one last little story I want to share before I turn things over to Chris. Any more questions? Oh, okay. Last brief story, just to wrap all this up. I was, so we talked about authenticity, right? Authenticity at work. In the context, we talk a lot, right, about inclusion and diversity here, of course, given the dialogue, but just for you, how can we show up authentically at work? And I think a lot of us have rules, even to your question. We have rules in our mind about what authenticity at work looks like, how we're supposed to show up based on our role, based on where we work and what we do, which totally makes sense, but sometimes it doesn't actually serve us. A number of years ago, I got invited to speak at a meeting for a big company. It was a big deal for me at the time. It was probably the highest level meeting I'd ever gotten invited to speak at. It was for the president of a brand of this company, and they asked me to come in, and it was his leadership meeting with his sort of direct reports, and then one level down, like the 60 top leaders in the brand, and I was excited, but I was nervous. And I really wanted it to go well, because I wanted to help them, but I also was hoping if it goes well, maybe they'll bring me back and there's opportunity, and this was a pretty big deal. And one of the things I'd been told by their head of HR who brought me in was like, look, Bob's kind of a no-nonsense guy, so we'd really appreciate, you know, he's basically saying like, Mike, we like what you do, but try not to have it be so touchy-feely, right? And I'm a pretty touchy-feely guy, so I'm like, okay, fine, I want to do, right? So I like actually made some slides for this one, and they wanted me to talk about a lot of the work I do around appreciation and strength-based leadership. And so anyway, I get there, and I'm in the back of the room, and I was going to speak later in the day, but I wanted to get there early just so I'd kind of meet some people and feel it out. And I could feel Bob was up there talking, and it was the beginning of the year, and the brand had had a really bad year the year before, and he was really, we got to do better, you know, it was very kind of intense. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I was just sort of feeling emotionally what was going on in the room, and I'm thinking, gosh, you know, everyone's really stressed, everyone's really like, but I'm fighting with myself. It's like, no, don't make it touchy-feely. Keep what they asked. You know, no. Okay. So I get up and I'm giving my presentation and I'm going through my slides and I'm talking about the importance. And it was going well, but it just didn't feel like it was really resonating the way that I wanted it to. And then I sort of was like, okay, look, I know last year was a tough year for you guys as a company and as a brand, and it was challenging. I said, who helped you get through? Who do you lean on? Who do you here at work and at home? And like, we just started to have this whole conversation. I had them pair up. They started talking about people in their lives at work and at home that they really care about and who matter to them. And the conversation started to open up, and we started to have more of a dialogue, which is what I like. And people were telling stories, right? It was more, okay, this is, but as we're having this whole conversation, I mean, out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking at Bob, and he's not happy, or doesn't seem to be. He has kind of a weird look on his face, and he like engaged a little bit, but then wasn't really and I'm like, oh gosh, maybe this is bad. But I just was like trusting my own intuition and kind of going with it. And then I get done at the end, and Bob comes up at the end of the meeting. He doesn't thank me. He doesn't look at me. He doesn't really even acknowledge me. He seems kind of upset. And I go sit down and think, oh man, I might have messed that up. And then Bob's up in front of the room, and he's kind of fumbling around, and he's coughing. He's just acting strange. I'm like, what's going on with him? That's not how he was earlier. And he said, you know, when Mike started to ask us about who we really appreciated and who helped us when things got tough, particularly last year, he said, I couldn't help but think about my mentor. He said there were a few times last year that I actually wanted to quit. It was going so bad. I felt like I was failing as the president of this brand because we were failing, even though I know I kept getting mad at you, but I was just, and he said, but my mentor really had my back. And as he started to talk more about his mentor, Bob started to cry. Now, Bob's not the crying kind of guy, right? But it was amazing. As he started to get emotional, you could, like, everyone in the room was like, and I'm over there like, oh gosh, right? You know, like, and then he got, like, he sort of was, and then he kind of wrapped up, and the meeting ends, and it's a little awkward, and then the head of HR, the guy who grabs me by the arm, pulls me out into the hallway, he looks me right in the eye, and he says, 4 years. 4 years. He's been in that role. We've been waiting for him to show up like that, and he finally did it today. Now, they did not bring me into that meeting to make Bob cry. That was not right. But the amazing thing that happened was, and Bob reached out to me after, and he told me he had never gotten so much feedback and email after a meeting with his leadership team in the whole 4 years he'd been in that role. He allowed himself to be real and vulnerable, and people could relate, and they appreciated it. He remembered, like all of us need to remember from time to time, even in the hierarchy and even in the challenge and the stress, and we look different, and this person over here and that person, we're way more alike than we are different down below the waterline. That's what it really means to be authentic at work. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Hi, folks. I'm Chris Ciotti, FAS HR, Dean for FAS HR. And Mike Robbins, thank you very, very much. Another round of applause for everything that you brought us today. It was wonderful. I actually, continuing on the theme of vulnerability, I thought as I was sitting here about getting up on the stage, because I'm only 5'2", and I thought, you know, add a few inches to my height. Then I thought, you know what, I'll be walking around, there is a chance I could fall off, because I'm a little clumsy, and so I'm staying here, so in any event. there was a lot to unpack, and a lot of the things that really matter to us as a community, you mentioned, and that we're going to be thinking about and unpacking. Mindfulness, authenticity, obviously, psychological safety, storytelling. And it's going to give us really wonderful food for thought. But most important, you're telling us the more we engage with our authentic selves, the stronger our FAS workplace is going to be. And that's what's really important to us. I'm going to close, but I'm going to start by saying thank you to everybody who's sitting in one of these chairs and who's on live streaming, because I know how busy everybody is in this community, and we really appreciate, and as Andrea said, we're very humbled that you've chosen to spend these hours with us today. I would also like to thank Andrea Kelton-Harris. You have to stand up. A wonderful colleague who has, now many years, has brought these dialogues to life for us, and they've been a safe place for us to share and talk about hard issues, and that's one of the many things that we've tried to do here. So the passion, your energy, your interest in finding someone like Mike and bringing him to us has really been inspiring to me. And it couldn't have been done without her two colleagues in crime from my team, our team, Eva Reves, and where's Annie McGough? Annie McGough, come forward, come on forward. Right. Thanks, guys. Whenever anything looks flawless and easy, you know that it's anything but. And we would never be able to stand here today. I'd never be able to stand here. We'd never be able to bring you this programming without leadership, support, and financial funding from my boss, manager, colleague, Leslie Kerwin, and Mike Smith, who are supportive to this effort in every way. So we appreciate that. So we're always thinking about how can you take what you learned in these dialogues back to your day-to-day. And hopefully that's feeling that you can be more open about your own identities and your backgrounds and your vulnerabilities, because we've tried it out today. And we've found and we've seen that it is not quite as scary. And when you open up, it encourages someone else to open up. Maybe that's sharing with somebody in your department what you learned here today, because that's valuable as well. And just thinking about authenticity is the gateway towards being that way. Let's see. So now we get to the good gift-giving part, right? Is our Rally Challenge participants. And these are the folks who have registered for these dialogues, attended, listened, and learned at each of the 3 dialogues during the year. Everybody who falls into that category gets one of Mike's books, which is, I flipped through it a little bit, looks wonderful. And we'd like you to stand up. Here now. Thank you. And your names, not only do you get a book, but your names are being put into a pot, and the winner of the pot, Annie, come on down, is going to win an app, either a smartwatch. So let me choose. Ooh. Drum roll. Yeah. Wait for it. All right. Oops, I got the email. I'm sorry. Let's see. It is, oops, they're intentionally checking my dexterity. It's Karen Rinn. You, yes! All right, congratulations. Congratulations. Our pleasure. So last but not least, before I let you go, we end our diversity dialogues for the academic year with this one, but by popular demand, we always do a summer panel. We're thinking about that right now. We don't have anything specific to share with you other than it's going to be in late August, and it's going to be good. So stay tuned for that. And until then, be kind, everybody, to each other, and keep it real. And most important, a lot of good books over there. The one that's coming out from Mike, 2 other excellent books. The group is here. Step over and see if it's something that you want to bring back to your life. Thank you again. Thank you. That was so wonderful. Thank you. Oh, my God. That was wonderful. I want to bring you home to my family.
Yeah. I got some